now in real time. You can see them as they're happening, and we make them very, very easy for you to get to.
Okay. What about the extensibility? Because this is one question that I get. I mean, you see a lot of, and this is something that I think is really important to clarify, right? Because you see all these different cross-plat tasks and stuff. But then what sometimes I get is, well, what about whatever that is, you know, whether at the HipChat or Slack or some other thing, right? And maybe you can clarify a little bit on what are some of the extensions for Visual Studio Online and how does that kind of relate a little bit?
Great. Team Foundation Server historically has always been very extensible, right? We've always had hooks in places where you can actually plug in your system. And what we're doing inside of Visual Studio Online as well is we're making sure that we give you REST APIs and other endpoints that you can listen to and monitor so that you can plug your system into it. We've also taken our task library that's inside of our build system and open sourced it so that people can contribute to it and that you can add your own to it. So we realize, and I believe this firmly, that Team Foundation Server and VSO is best when you use all of it as a unit. But there's going to be times where you're going to need to replace the build system with something else or the release system with something else. And we've put those hooks in place to where if you'd like to use it all, great. But if you need to take it piece by piece and use it, we have that functionality for you as well.
Cool. All right, DevOps frame. So we talked about, the title of this course is, enabling DevOps practices. Well, what is a DevOps practice? What does that mean? We are definitely not going to explain all of what DevOps means to you today, but I do want to at least explain to you at a high level, how does a DevOps practice relate to this whole DevOps thing that's out there? At the kind of flying really high, the 50 or almost the 100 level, right? You're going to have things that relate to DevOps like people, right? Dev, ops, business. You're going to have things like process. You're going to say, what is the business value of doing DevOps? All those types of things float at a very high level. And on the other side of the spectrum, the 300 or deeper level of the conversation, you start to have all these different tools that pop up, right? I'm doing Chef, and I'm doing Puppet, and I'm doing technology, whatever that is, Jenkins and release management Docker. And all those things. And there's a bit of if you left it at that, there's a bit of a disconnect, right? Because you're saying, well, there's this kind of DevOps high-level concept thing, and then there's this technology thing. And some people incorrectly say, well, I'm using Chef, so I'm DevOps, or I'm using this. And so it's like, no, no, right. You're not, right? You have to have that people process and that whole thing in place in your organization. But there is still a desire, right, to kind of connect those two concepts together. And so that's where DevOps practice really comes into play. A DevOps practice is really something that I would call more industry recognized, with like a set of things that you do, and we'll explain more of the specific three that we're going to talk about in a bit. But that helps you to really kind of bridge those gaps, right? So if you're doing, let's say, infrastructure as code, there are tons of different ways you can implement infrastructure as code, whether you're using Microsoft or not. That is a DevOps practice, infrastructure as code, on how you can kind of bridge the gap between all of those, the high-level things and the 300-level technology things. So that's what we mean here, and how DevOps practices fits into the bigger picture. What are the DevOps practices, though? Well, this is just a list here that I've come up with, and the left-hand side I would say is probably more of the more well-known ones in that space, but specifically for today, we are going to be covering, these three and how Visual Studio Online Build can help with those three components. Now, that being said, Visual Studio Online, in general, there is a lot to it. Like we mentioned, that first slide we had at the beginning of this module, there's a ton here, and there's no way we're going to cover all of these things today. But just know that Visual Studio Online can enable a lot of other things here, and we're just going to focus on just these three today. So with that, I would love to snap over to Donovan.
Sure.
And give you just kind of a quick intro, right, on VSO so that people may get a little familiar with at least the source code side of things?
Sure. So you'll be able to follow along if you have a VSO account with what we're going to be doing today. So what we're going to start off with is showing you how to create a team project that uses Git as the repository. And then we're going to actually take some code off of GitHub and use that as our sample project for the remainder of our modules today. So to get started, inside of your VSO account, you can simply click on New. This is going to allow me to create a new team project. You can give it any name you want. We can call it MVA02. And then from here, we can choose a process template. So if you're Scrum or Agile or CMMI, you get to choose what template you'd like it to use. And then down here, you get to choose the version control. As you can see, Team Foundation Server version control is still the default. And I want to take a moment to say we're not getting rid of TFVC. Right? David and I spoke about which source control system we wanted to talk to today. We chose Git, but that is no indication that we're dropping support for TFVC. Right? Git is very popular right now, and you'll see a lot of activity from Microsoft on Git, and that's because there's some workflows that we have in TFVC that aren't implemented in Git yet. So yeah, there's a lot of activity and excitement there, but it's not an indication of our lack of support for TFVC. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I'm a big TFVC fan, but Git is unavoidable. So regardless if you love it or not, you're going to have to learn it. So let's go ahead and use this as an opportunity to learn how to use Git as well. So I'm going to go ahead and create this project. And as the original slide showed with TFS and Visual Studio Online, there's a lot of value. So what it's doing in the background right now is creating all that value for us. It's giving us a place to store our test cases, our bugs, our requirements, our builds, our releases, all that valuable stuff. And now it's done. It's very quick to do. And what I'm going to have now is an opportunity to see a dashboard of our brand new project. It gives me a quick way to get started, and what we're interested in today is the code. So if I go to the code tab, you're going to see that I now have a private repo inside of TFS, but there's no code in it. So what we're going to need to do now is go get some code. We have a couple projects, David and I both, that you can use to follow along. My username is Dark, D-A-R-Q-U-E, Warrior. And if we search here, you'll be able to see that I have some repos up here, and the one that we're going to be using first is going to be the Parts Unlimited repo. And there's a branch in here that we're going to want to use, which is the ASP.NET 4.5 branch. And all I'm going to do real quickly is just download the zip file. If I open this up, I'll be able to just copy this folder, and then let's find a place on our hard drive where we want to store this information. And I'm just going to go very quickly to C, create a folder called Repos here. And then simply paste this folder into it. Now I'm going to be using my credentials from VSO to do all of my work, but as David pointed out, there is a way for you to actually go in and set what we call alternative credentials that will allow you, I believe that this is the right tab for that.
You got it.
So when it loads up here in just a second, we're going to be able to set alternate credentials that you could then type in on the command line versus having to use your Hotmail or whatever account you're using to associate with your Git repo here. I'm going to go ahead and steal this while I'm here. While that loads, we'll come back and look at that here. I don't want to wait for that particular thing to load. We're going to go ahead and jump into PowerShell. And I'm going to use normal Git command. So the point that we want to drive home here is this is the Git you know and love. It's not a TFS version of Git or a Microsoft version of Git. This is just flat out Git. So I'm going to run commands that if you're a Git user that you should be familiar with, and hopefully that I get right because, like I said before, I am a TFVC fan. But we're going to go ahead and get into the Parts Unlimited folder, and I'm just going to go ahead and do a git init. And I'm also going to go ahead and set up some global configuration stuff. So I'm going to do git config global. And from here, I'm going to set up my user email, if I can type today. And I'm going to just go ahead and use my Hotmail account, which I also misspelled here, hotmail.com. And I'm going to do another git config, and I'm going to set my username. All right, I think I'm getting the hang of this keyboard a little better. Now that I have that set up, what I'm going to need to be able to do is push this information into our repo. And to do that, you're going to have to set up a remote. So we're going to do git remote. We're going to add a new one. We're going to call this guy origin. And we're simply going to paste in what we copied from the clipboard. And now that we have that, we basically need to do the normal Git stuff you would do. Add the files to our repo, commit that repo, and then push it. So we're going to do a git add, and I'm just going to add everything. And then after doing that, I'm going to go ahead and commit these changes. So let's do a git commit. And I'm going to do hyphen this, and this is just going to be my initial check-in here. And then finally, I need to push these changes to our repo. So if I simply do a git push, and I want to make sure I get all this stuff there, this should start pushing all of my stuff up there once I log in. And this is where the credentials that we just talked about, or I'll show you here in just a second, you can set so you don't have to put this on the command line. And hopefully everything starts going up the way I want it to. And then in a moment, when I go back here, so from here I go to, is it security?
Yep.
And for some reason, this is running a little slower than I'd like it to. Always does when you're doing a demo.
Yeah, so it's important to point out too the commands for git config for global, that's only done on the first time. Right?
Absolutely.
And that's just so that when you push to the repo, people know who you are. That's just part of the way in which